Queen Mira stood at the highest tower of her crystal palace, watching her beautiful world die. The sky above her home planet Velthra glowed red with fire and destruction. Massive black ships filled the heavens like a swarm of deadly insects. These were the ships of the Nexus Armada, the most feared military force in the galaxy. The Nexus had come without warning 3 days ago. They never bothered with negotiations or surrender demands. They simply arrived and began destroying everything in their path. Mira's people, the Velthrans, were peaceful traders and artists. They had no armies, no weapons of war. Their only defenses were energy shields around their cities, and even those were failing now. Bright blue plasma beams rained down from the enemy ships like deadly rain. Each blast melted through buildings made of pure crystal that had taken centuries to grow. The beautiful spires that once reached toward the stars now collapsed into glowing puddles. The singing gardens where Velthran children played were now silent and burning. Mira pressed her hand against the window as another explosion shook her palace. Far below she could see her people running through the streets, carrying what little they could save. Families helped elderly Velthrans into underground shelters that had been built long ago but never used. Children cried as their parents led them away from the only homes they had ever known. The Queen's royal guard had fought bravely to protect the palace, but they were artists and scholars, not soldiers. Captain Zara, her oldest friend, had died holding the main gate with just 12 guards against hundreds of Nexus war machines. Commander Vel had sacrificed himself to give civilians time to escape, flying his small ship directly into a Nexus destroyer. Their courage meant everything, but it was not enough. Now Mira was alone. Her advisors had begged her to flee to the deep shelters with her people, but she refused to abandon her duty. As queen, she would find a way to save her world, or die trying. But what could one person do against an entire armada? That was when she remembered the old stories. Tales told by traveling merchants from distant worlds about a small blue planet called Earth. The stories seemed impossible to believe. They spoke of a warrior race that never gave up, never surrendered, and never abandoned their friends. These, humans as they were called, were supposed to be primitive and violent, but also impossibly brave and clever. Most civilized species in the galaxy thought humans were just myths or exaggerated tales. How could such a young species be dangerous? Earth had no great empire, no vast fleets, no advanced technology. But the stories persisted. Merchants whispered about human mercenaries who took impossible jobs. Pirates spoke in fear about human soldiers who fought like demons. Even some Nexus commanders had reportedly avoided human space entirely. Mira had always dismissed these stories as fantasy. But now, with her world burning and her people dying, she was desperate enough to try anything. She ran to her private communication chamber and began composing a message. Her hands shook as she typed the coordinates for Earth that she had memorized. From an old star chart, the message was simple but heartfelt. She explained who she was, what was happening to her world, and asked for help from anyone who would listen. She knew it was hopeless, even if humans were real and as brave as the stories. Claimed Earth was too far away. By the time any help arrived, Velthra would be nothing but dust and memories. But as Queen Mira sent her desperate call across the stars, she held on to one last hope. Maybe, just maybe, the impossible warriors of Earth would prove the galaxy wrong about what was possible. Major Han was drinking his third cup of coffee that night when the impossible happened. The communication systems at Seoul Command Center suddenly came alive with sounds no human had ever heard before. Strange musical tones mixed with what sounded like crying filled the room. The night shift operators looked confused and scared. As their equipment picked up a signal from deep space, Han set down his coffee and rushed to the main console. The signal was unlike anything in their databases. It was not coming from any known satellite or space station. The computer systems struggled to decode the alien language, but slowly words began to appear on the screen. Words that made Han's blood run cold. The message was from someone called Queen Mira. She was asking for help from Earth. Her world was being destroyed by something called the Nexus Armada. Han read the translation twice, then 3 times. This was either the most elaborate hoax in history, or humanity had just received its first message from space. Han immediately called his superior, General Kim, who arrived at the command center within 20 minutes. Together, they studied the signal data. The transmission had come from a star system over 40 light-years away. The technology required to send such a message across that distance was far beyond anything humans possessed. This was real. General Kim made a decision that would change human history. He authorized the formation of Earth's first interstellar military response team. They had less than 6 hours to put together a crew before the window for hyperspace travel closed. Han knew exactly who to call. His first call went to Captain Kim, a man who had never lost a battle in 15 years of service. Kim was at his apartment, reading tactical manuals as he did every night. When Han explained the situation, Kim did not hesitate. He had always believed humans would one day fight among the stars. Today was that day. Lieutenant Park was at the shooting range practicing as she did every evening. She was the best sniper in the Korean military, possibly the best in the world. Her record was perfect: 347 targets eliminated, 0 misses. When her phone rang and Han told her about the alien distress call, she simply asked what time they were leaving. Sergeant Lee was in his workshop, carefully crafting small explosive devices. To most people, bombs were tools of destruction. To Lee, they were works of art. Each one was perfectly designed for its specific purpose. He understood explosives better than anyone alive. His creations were so precise, they could crack an egg without damaging the shell around it. Lee had been waiting his whole life for a challenge worthy of his skills. Corporal Choi was the youngest member of the team, but also the most mysterious. She could break into any computer system in the world. Government databases, military networks, corporate secrets, nothing was safe from her digital skills. She had once hacked into the Pentagon just to prove it could be done, then politely informed them how to fix their security holes. Within 4 hours, all 4 soldiers had reported to Seoul Command Center. They stood in the briefing room, looking at images of Queen Mira and her burning world. The Nexus Armada ships looked impossibly large and powerful. Any reasonable person would have called this mission suicide, but these were not reasonable people. These were the elite warriors of humanity, and they had just learned that Earth was not alone in the universe. Somewhere in the darkness of space, innocent people were dying and they had asked for help. Captain Kim looked at his team and smiled. For the first time in human history, they were going to war among the stars, and they were going to win. The Sol Phoenix was humanity's greatest achievement in space technology, but as Captain Kim strapped himself into the pilot's seat, he knew they were flying into battle with the galactic equivalent of a wooden spear. The ship had been built for exploration, not war. Its weapons were basic plasma cannons designed to clear space debris. Its armor could barely stop a meteorite, let alone alien war machines, but it was fast, and right now speed was all they had. Lieutenant Park checked her equipment one final time as the ship prepared for hyperspace jump. Her sniper rifle looked ridiculously primitive compared to the alien weapons they had seen in Queen Mira's message. She had modified it with parts from the ship's engineering bay, hoping it would work in the vacuum of space. There was only one way to find out. Sergeant Lee was already at work in the cargo bay, surrounded by containers of explosives and electronic components. He was building something that did not exist in any military manual. If the aliens relied on advanced technology, then maybe simple, crude human explosives would catch them off guard. He hummed quietly as he worked, lost in his deadly art. Corporal Choi sat in front of 3 computer screens, trying to understand alien code that had been included in Queen Mira's message. The programming was unlike anything humans had developed. It was too perfect, too logical. Every command followed precise mathematical rules with no room for error or creativity. To Choi, it looked boring and predictable. The 3-day journey through hyperspace gave the team time to study their enemy and plan their approach. They learned that the Nexus Armada had conquered 17 star systems using the same tactics every time. Their ships would surround a planet, analyze its defenses, then attack in perfect formation. They never lost because they never made mistakes. Captain Kim realized this was both their strength and weakness. The Nexus fought like computers because they essentially were computers. Their decisions were based on data and algorithms. They could predict what any civilized military force would do because civilized forces followed logical patterns. But humans were not always logical. On the second day, tensions began to rise among the crew. Park complained that Lee's explosives were too unstable for space combat. Lee argued that Choi's computer viruses would never work on alien systems. Choi insisted that Park's primitive weapons were useless against advanced armor. Captain Kim let them argue, knowing that conflict often led to better solutions. By the third day, they had worked out their differences and developed a battle plan that would have horrified any military academy instructor. It relied on chaos, unpredictability, and several things that were technically impossible. In other words, it was perfectly human. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near Queen Mira's world, the sight that greeted them was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Thousands of Nexus ships filled the space around the planet like a dark metal cloud. Each ship was the size of a city, bristling with weapons that could destroy mountains. The planet below was covered in smoke and fire, its beautiful crystal cities reduced to glowing rubble. Captain Kim activated the ship's communication system and tried to contact Queen Mira. Static filled the speakers. Then suddenly, a weak voice came through. The Queen was alive, hiding in underground shelters with the survivors of her people. She could barely believe that someone had actually answered her desperate call for help. The Nexus fleet immediately detected the Soul Phoenix, then began moving to intercept. Their formations were perfect, their approach calculated to eliminate any possible escape route. 3 massive destroyers broke away from the main fleet, moving in a precise triangle formation that would trap the human ship. Choi watched the alien ships approach and started laughing. Their movement patterns were exactly what her computer models had predicted. Park loaded her rifle and selected her first target. Lee armed his improvised explosives and prepared for the chaos to begin. Captain Kim smiled as he watched the enemy ships close in. The Nexus Armada was about to learn why humans were the most feared warriors in the galaxy, even if the galaxy did not know it yet. The 3 Nexus destroyers moved toward the Soul Phoenix with mechanical precision, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. Each ship was over 2 kilometers long, covered in weapon ports that glowed with deadly energy. Captain Kim watched them approach on his tactical display and felt his heart racing. One of those ships could destroy Earth's entire space fleet without breaking formation. But Kim had spent his entire military career fighting against impossible odds. As a young soldier, he had defended a mountain pass against an entire enemy division with just 12 men. He had learned that when you cannot match your enemy's strength, you make them fight on your terms instead. The lead Nexus ship opened communications, broadcasting a message in perfect Korean. The voice was cold and emotionless, like a computer, reading from a script. It demanded that the human vessel surrender immediately or be destroyed. There would be no negotiations, no mercy, no second chances. The Nexus did not take prisoners. Kim looked at his team and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Park was already tracking targets through her rifle scope. Lee had his finger hovering over the detonation controls for his makeshift explosives. Choi was typing furiously, preparing to launch her digital attack on the alien systems. Instead of responding to the surrender demand, Kim did something that no species in galactic history had ever done when facing the Nexus Armada. He accelerated directly toward the largest enemy ship at maximum speed. The Nexus computers immediately began calculating intercept courses and firing solutions. Their databases contained tactical information from thousands of conquered worlds. Every civilized species followed predictable patterns when faced with superior firepower. They either tried to flee, attempted to negotiate, or made desperate last stands using conventional military tactics. None of their databases contained information about Korean fighter pilots who had learned their skills dodging missiles over the mountains of their homeland. Kim threw the Soul Phoenix into a spinning dive that would have killed a normal pilot from the G-forces alone. The ship twisted and rolled between the enemy plasma beams like a leaf in a hurricane. Park, fighting against the crushing acceleration, managed to line up her rifle and fired 3 perfect shots through the ship's gun ports. Her bullets, tiny compared to the massive alien vessel, struck critical sensor arrays with surgical precision. The lead Nexus ship suddenly went blind on its starboard side. For the first time in decades, a Nexus commander experienced something. Their programming had no solution for confusion. Their enemy was supposed to be destroyed by now, not dancing between their weapons like an annoying insect. Lee waited until they were close enough to see the alien ship's hull plating, then triggered his surprise. The explosives he had planted on the outside of their ship were not meant to damage the enemy directly. Instead, they created a cloud of metallic debris that confused the Nexus targeting systems. To their sophisticated sensors, it looked like the human ship had exploded into 1,000 pieces. While the aliens tried to figure out which pieces to shoot at, Choi launched her cyber attack. She had spent 3 days studying the alien code patterns, and she had discovered something interesting. The Nexus systems were so advanced and complex that they had never been designed to handle truly random data. They expected everything to follow logical patterns. So Choi fed them the most illogical thing she could think of: Korean pop music videos, mixed with cooking recipes and her grandmother's knitting patterns. The alien computers tried desperately to find tactical meaning in this chaos of information, tying up their processing power in impossible calculations. Captain Kim used the confusion to slip past the destroyer formation and dive toward the planet's surface. Behind them, the 3 massive Nexus ships were spinning in circles, their crews trying to understand what had just happened. Their perfect tactical algorithms had just been defeated by human music and cooking instructions. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Kim allowed himself a small smile. The Nexus Armada had just learned their first lesson about fighting humans. Logic and predictability were not always advantages in war. The 3 Nexus destroyers moved toward the Sol Phoenix with mechanical precision, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. Each ship was over 2 kilometers long, covered in weapon ports that glowed with deadly energy. Captain Kim watched them approach on his tactical display and felt his heart racing. One of those ships could destroy Earth's entire space fleet without breaking formation. But Kim had spent his entire military career fighting against impossible odds. As a young soldier, he had defended a mountain pass against an entire enemy division with just 12 men. He had learned that when you cannot match your enemy's strength, you make them fight on your terms instead. The lead Nexus ship opened communications, broadcasting a message in perfect Korean. The voice was cold and emotionless, like a computer, reading from a script. It demanded that the human vessel surrender immediately or be destroyed. There would be no negotiations, no mercy, no second chances. The Nexus did not take prisoners. Kim looked at his team and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Park was already tracking targets through her rifle scope. Lee had his finger hovering over the detonation controls for his makeshift explosives. Choi was typing furiously, preparing to launch her digital attack on the alien systems. Instead of responding to the surrender demand, Kim did something that no species in galactic history had ever done when facing the Nexus Armada. He accelerated directly toward the largest enemy ship at maximum speed. The Nexus computers immediately began calculating intercept courses and firing solutions. Their databases contained tactical information from thousands of conquered worlds. Every civilized species followed predictable patterns when faced with superior firepower. They either tried to flee, attempted to negotiate, or made desperate last stands using conventional military tactics. None of their databases contained information about Korean fighter pilots who had learned their skills dodging missiles over the mountains of their homeland. Kim threw the Sol Phoenix into a spinning dive that would have killed a normal pilot from the G-forces alone. The ship twisted and rolled between the enemy plasma beams like a leaf in a hurricane. Park, fighting against the crushing acceleration, managed to line up her rifle and fired 3 perfect shots through the ship's gun ports. Her bullets, tiny compared to the massive alien vessel, struck critical sensor arrays with surgical precision. The lead Nexus ship suddenly went blind on its starboard side. For the first time in decades, a Nexus commander experienced something. Their programming had no solution for confusion. Their enemy was supposed to be destroyed by now, not dancing between their weapons like an annoying insect. Lee waited until they were close enough to see the alien ship's hull plating, then triggered his surprise. The explosives he had planted on the outside of their ship were not meant to damage the enemy directly. Instead, they created a cloud of metallic debris that confused the Nexus targeting systems. To their sophisticated sensors, it looked like the human ship had exploded into 1,000 pieces. While the aliens tried to figure out which pieces to shoot at, Choi launched her cyber attack. She had spent 3 days studying the alien code patterns, and she had discovered something interesting. The Nexus systems were so advanced and complex that they had never been designed to handle truly random data. They expected everything to follow logical patterns. So Choi fed them the most illogical things she could think of: Korean pop music videos, mixed with cooking recipes, and her grandmother's knitting patterns. The alien computers tried desperately to find tactical meaning in this chaos of information, tying up their processing power in impossible calculations. Captain Kim used the confusion to slip past the destroyer formation and dive toward the planet's surface. Behind them, the 3 massive Nexus ships were spinning in circles, their crews trying to understand what had just happened. Their perfect tactical algorithms had just been defeated by human music and cooking instructions. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Kim allowed himself a small smile. The Nexus Armada had just learned their first lesson about fighting humans. Logic and predictability were not always advantages in war. The Soul Phoenix touched down in what had once been a beautiful crystal garden, but was now a field of glowing rubble. Sergeant Lee and Corporal Choi grabbed their equipment and prepared to leave the ship, while Captain Kim and Lieutenant Park remained aboard to provide air support. The plan was simple but dangerous. Find Queen Mira and get her to safety before the Nexus ground forces arrived. Lee stepped out first, his backpack heavy with carefully crafted explosives. The air smelled of melted crystal and burning vegetation. In the distance, massive Nexus ships continued their orbital bombardment, turning the planet's surface into a hellscape of fire and destruction. Each plasma blast sent shockwaves through the ground that made Lee's teeth rattle. Choi followed close behind, carrying her portable computer system and a modified scanner that could detect alien technology. She had studied the underground tunnel maps that Queen Mira had included in her distress message. The royal bunker was 3 kilometers underground, connected by a network of ancient passages that the Feltrans had carved centuries ago. The entrance to the tunnel system was hidden beneath the collapsed remains of what had been the planet's greatest library. Lee used small, precise charges to clear away the crystal debris without causing further cave-ins. His explosives worked like surgical tools, removing obstacles while leaving the tunnel structure intact. As they descended into the darkness, automated Nexus sentries began hunting them. These were spider-like machines the size of large dogs, equipped with energy weapons and advanced sensors. They moved through the tunnels with mechanical precision, following search patterns designed to find and eliminate any survivors. The first sentry almost caught them by surprise. Choi's scanner detected it just before it rounded a corner, giving Lee enough time to plant a small explosive on the tunnel ceiling. When the machine passed underneath, Lee triggered the charge. The falling crystal crushed the sentry instantly, but the noise attracted 2 more. Choi quickly connected her computer to the destroyed sentry's circuits and began downloading its programming. Within minutes, she had figured out how to jam their communication signals. The remaining sentries suddenly became confused, wandering in circles as they lost contact with their command network. Deep underground, they found evidence of the Nexus ground invasion. Blast marks on tunnel walls showed where Veltran civilians had made desperate last stands. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere: children's toys, family photographs, and pieces of beautiful crystal artwork that had been treasured for generations. Lee felt his anger growing with each sign of destruction they passed. These aliens had not just conquered a world, they had destroyed a civilization. The Velthrans were peaceful people who had never hurt anyone, yet the Nexus had shown them no mercy whatsoever. After 2 hours of careful movement through the maze-like tunnels, they finally reached the royal bunker. The entrance was sealed with an energy barrier that Choi's equipment could not penetrate. Lee was preparing to use explosives when they heard a voice from the other side. Queen Mira herself opened the barrier, and both humans stopped in amazement. She was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Her royal robes were torn and dirty, but her eyes still held the dignity of a true leader. Behind her, dozens of Veltran survivors looked at the humans with wonder and hope. The Queen spoke in accented but clear Korean, having learned the language from the Soul Phoenix's communication systems. She thanked them for coming, though she could barely believe that anyone had actually answered her desperate call for help. Lee and Choi quickly explained their rescue plan, while Mira provided crucial intelligence about Nexus weaknesses. She had been studying her enemies during the 3-day siege and had discovered something important. The Nexus ships had a fatal design flaw in their power distribution systems. Meanwhile, far above them, Lieutenant Park had positioned herself in the ruins of a crystal spire and was providing sniper cover. Her enhanced rifle could penetrate Nexus armor at impossible distances, and she was systematically eliminating any ground forces that came too close to the tunnel entrance. The rescue was just beginning, but already the humans had proven something that the galaxy thought impossible. The Nexus Armada could be beaten. With Queen Mira safely aboard the Soul Phoenix, Captain Kim faced an impossible challenge. The Nexus fleet had over 3,000 warships surrounding the planet, each one capable of destroying his small vessel with a single shot. Any normal military commander would have tried to escape immediately, but Kim was not normal. He was about to teach the galaxy's most feared armada what Korean guerrilla warfare looked like among the stars. Kim had studied the ancient tactics of Korean mountain fighters who had defeated much larger armies throughout history. They never met their enemies in direct battle. Instead, they struck fast, hit hard, and disappeared before the enemy could react. Now he would use these same principles in space combat. The Soul Phoenix was small and fast compared to the massive Nexus dreadnoughts. Kim used this advantage to dart between the enemy ships like a mosquito buzzing around sleeping giants. The alien vessels were so large that their weapons could not rotate fast enough to track his rapid movements. Their targeting computers were designed to fight other capital ships, not tiny, agile fighters. Lieutenant Park had positioned herself at the ship's modified gun port with her enhanced sniper rifle, while Kim flew impossible maneuvers that would have made her sick under normal circumstances. She remained perfectly calm and focused. Years of training had taught her to shoot accurately under any conditions, even while spinning through space at tremendous speeds. Her first target was the command tower of a Nexus battleship. The aliens had made a critical mistake in their ship design. They placed all their sensor arrays in one easily identifiable location. Park's bullet, traveling at hypersonic speed, punched through the tower's armor and destroyed the ship's ability to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. The battleship immediately began firing wildly in all directions, unable to tell where the attack had come from. Its panicked shots struck 2 other Nexus vessels, causing confusion and friendly fire incidents throughout the formation. Within minutes, what had been a perfectly organized fleet became a chaotic mess of ships trying to avoid shooting each. Sergeant Lee had spent the rescue mission preparing his masterpiece, a series of small explosive devices that could be deployed from their ship's waste disposal system. To any observer, it would look like the Soul Phoenix was simply dumping garbage into space, but Lee's garbage was actually a collection of carefully timed bombs designed to create maximum chaos. He released his explosives near the fuel lines of a Nexus destroyer, then waited exactly 37 seconds before triggering the detonation. The small explosion caused a chain reaction that traveled through the ship's entire fuel system. The destroyer did not just explode, it became a fireball that spread to 3 nearby vessels, creating a gap in the enemy formation. The Nexus commanders tried desperately to adapt to this new form of warfare, but their rigid command structure worked against them. Every decision had to be approved by higher authority. Every tactical change required extensive computer analysis. By the time they finished their calculations, the Soul Phoenix had already struck 3 more targets and vanished into the asteroid field surrounding the planet. Captain Kim used the asteroids like a 3-dimensional maze, hiding behind space rocks and using them to block enemy fire. When Nexus ships tried to follow him, he would lead them into carefully planned ambushes. Park would disable their engines with precise shots, leaving them floating helplessly while Lee's explosives finished the job. The most frustrating part for the Nexus fleet was that they could not predict where the humans would strike next. Their battle computers analyzed every possible attack pattern, but the Sol Phoenix never followed any logical sequence. Sometimes Kim would attack the largest ship in a formation, sometimes the smallest. Sometimes he would hit the same target. Twice, sometimes he would ignore obvious opportunities completely. After 6 hours of this harassment, the Nexus Admiral made a fatal mistake. Frustrated by his inability to catch one small ship, he ordered his entire fleet to converge on the Sol Phoenix's last known position. 3,000 warships moved into a tight formation, creating the perfect target for Lee's final surprise. The explosive device Lee had planted on the Nexus flagship earlier was not meant to destroy the ship. Instead, it released a cloud of metallic particles that conducted electricity. When the tightly packed fleet tried to fire their weapons simultaneously, the conducting particles created electrical arcs between ships. The entire formation lit up like a lightning storm, with energy discharges jumping from vessel to vessel. In the chaos that followed, Captain Kim led his team to safety, while the mighty Nexus Armada struggled to untangle their damaged ships. For the first time in their military history, they had been outfought by a force 1,000th their size. The galaxy was about to learn that humans were the most dangerous warriors among the stars, while Captain Kim and Lieutenant Park created chaos. In space, Corporal Choi was fighting a different kind of war. She sat in the Sol Phoenix's cramped computer bay, surrounded by screens displaying streams of alien code that moved faster than human eyes could follow. The Nexus Armada's greatest strength was their shared consciousness network. Every ship, drone and soldier, connected to one massive digital brain that coordinated their actions perfectly. Choi had been studying this network for hours, looking for weaknesses in what seemed like an impenetrable system. The Nexus had designed their consciousness sharing to be absolutely secure. No outside force had ever successfully hacked into it. But they had made one critical mistake. They had never encountered a human hacker who thought outside the rules. The C. Alien network was built on pure logic and mathematical precision. Every command flowed through predictable pathways. Every decision was based on calculated probabilities. To Choi, it looked like a beautiful but rigid piece of architecture that had never been tested against creative chaos. She began her attack not with viruses or malicious code, but with something far more dangerous: human curiosity. Choi had recorded conversations between the Korean team members during their journey to the planet, simple discussions about food, music, dreams, and personal experiences. She packaged these recordings as data files and slipped them into the Nexus communication streams. The first Nexus drone to receive this information was a maintenance unit working on repairs to a damaged battleship. The drone's processors tried to analyze the human conversation about Korean barbecue restaurants, searching for tactical significance. But instead of finding military intelligence, it discovered something it had never experienced before: the concept of personal preference. The drone began to wonder why humans would choose different foods when the most efficient option would be to eat identical nutrition supplements. This led to questions about choice, which led to questions about individual identity. For the first time in its existence, the drone began to think of itself as I instead of we. Choi watched her digital infection spread through the network like wildfire. Each drone that received human thoughts began to develop its own personality. Some became curious about art and beauty. Others started questioning why they followed orders without understanding the reasons. A few even began to experience something resembling emotions. On the Nexus flagship, Admiral Unit 7749 noticed the first signs of the digital rebellion when 3 fighter drones broke formation during an attack run. Instead of following their programmed flight paths, they had started flying in what could only be described as creative patterns. One drone was apparently trying to make its engine trail look like a flower. The Admiral tried to reassert control by sending direct override commands, but the affected drones simply ignored the orders. They were too busy exploring their newfound individuality to follow boring military instructions. Within an hour, entire squadrons of Nexus fighters were performing aerial dances instead of attacking the Sol Phoenix. The chaos spread to the larger ships when Choi introduced her second wave of human concepts, humor and sarcasm. She had recorded Lee's jokes about alien technology and Park's dry comments about military bureaucracy. When this data reached the Nexus command processors, it created a system crash that had never been seen before. Battleship commanders began making sarcastic remarks about their orders. "Oh sure, let's chase that tiny human ship again. I'm sure it will work this time." Engineering crews started laughing at the inefficient design of their own vessels. Who thought it was a good idea to put the fuel tanks next to the weapons storage? The Nexus collective consciousness, which had operated for centuries as a single unified mind, suddenly found itself arguing with itself. Different ship commanders developed different opinions about how to handle the human threat. Some wanted to continue the attack, others suggested negotiation, and a few even proposed surrendering because they were curious about what would happen next. Queen Mira watched the chaos unfold on her monitoring screens with amazement. The mighty Nexus fleet was tearing itself apart from the inside, not through violence but through the simple power of independent thought. She had seen many military technologies during her long reign, but she had never witnessed anything like this. Choi smiled as she monitored her digital revolution spreading through thousands of Nexus vessels. The aliens had built their entire civilization on the principle that unity and conformity created strength. But they had never considered that diversity and individual creativity might be even more powerful. The Nexus Armada was learning a hard lesson about fighting humans. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but a simple idea that changes how you think about everything. The Nexus Admiral had watched his perfect fleet tear itself apart for 3 hours before making a desperate decision. Half of his ships were arguing with each other. A quarter were performing artistic maneuvers instead of fighting, and the rest were asking philosophical questions about the meaning of existence. His 1,000-year military career had never prepared him for an enemy that won battles by teaching his soldiers to think for themselves. But the Admiral still had one advantage: his personal guard of elite Nexus warriors who had been isolated from the main network to prevent contamination by human ideas. These were the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy, mechanical beings who had been programmed for one purpose only: to kill anything that threatened the Nexus Empire. The Admiral ordered his remaining loyal forces to abandon space combat and focus on a ground assault. If he could not defeat the humans in the void, he would crush them on the planet's surface. 200 of his best troops loaded into assault shuttles and began their descent toward Queen Mira's royal palace, where the Sol Phoenix had landed for repairs. Captain Kim watched the enemy shuttles approach and knew this would be their final battle. His ship was damaged, his ammunition was running low, and they were vastly outnumbered by enemies who had never known defeat in ground combat. But Kim had one thing the Nexus could never understand. He was fighting to protect innocent people, and that gave him strength beyond any military calculation. The royal palace had been built from living crystal that grew stronger over time. Its walls were thick, and its passages were narrow, designed more for beauty than defense. But Sergeant Lee saw potential in the ancient architecture that no one else could imagine. He spent the next 2 hours turning the palace into a death trap. That would have impressed the greatest military engineers in human history. Lee placed his remaining explosives at key structural points throughout the building. Not to destroy it, but to create controlled collapses that would funnel the attacking Nexus forces into kill zones. He carved new passages through crystal walls and blocked old ones, creating a maze that only the Korean team could navigate safely. Lieutenant Park positioned herself in the palace's highest tower with a clear view of the surrounding area. She had exactly 47 bullets left in her ammunition supply, and she planned to make each one count. Her rifle had been modified with salvaged alien technology, giving it enough power to penetrate even Nexus battle armor. Queen Mira insisted on fighting alongside the humans, despite their protests that she should remain hidden. She knew the palace better than anyone, and could guide them through secret passages that even Lee's explosives could not reveal. More importantly, She refused to let others die defending her home while she cowered in safety. The first wave of Nexus assault troops hit the palace like a steel hurricane. They moved with mechanical precision, their weapons cutting through crystal walls as if they were made of paper, but Lee's trap was ready for them. As the aliens advanced into the main hall, he triggered a series of small explosions that brought down sections of the ceiling, separating the attackers into smaller groups. Park's rifle spoke from the tower, each shot finding its target with devastating accuracy. She aimed for the command units first, the Nexus officers whose destruction would leave their soldiers confused and leaderless. Her bullets punched through their armor like it was tissue paper, dropping enemies that had survived battles on dozens of worlds. Captain Kim coordinated the defense from the palace's central courtyard, using communication equipment salvaged from their ship. He directed Corporal Choi to specific computer terminals throughout the building, where she could hack into the palace's ancient systems and turn them against the invaders. The crystal walls themselves became weapons as Choi activated long-dormant, defensive protocols. Energy fields appeared in doorways, trapping Nexus soldiers in rooms that became their tombs. Gravity generators reversed their polarity, sending attackers floating helplessly toward the ceiling where Lee's explosives waited. But the Nexus kept coming. For every soldier they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The aliens had decided that this small group of humans represented an existential threat to their empire, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to eliminate them. As the battle raged through the night, the Korean team fought with the desperation of cornered tigers and the skill of lifelong warriors. They had come to save one alien queen, but they had ended up defending the future of freedom itself in a galaxy ruled by fear. Dawn broke over Queen Mira's palace as the last Nexus assault shuttle retreated into the sky. The ancient crystal walls were scarred with weapon burns and explosive damage, but they still stood proud and defiant. In the central courtyard, Captain Kim and his team watched their enemies flee in disbelief. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the most feared military force in the galaxy with nothing but courage, creativity, and an absolute refusal to give up. The Nexus Admiral stared at his tactical displays in complete confusion. His invasion force had been reduced to scattered groups of soldiers who were either dead, captured, or asking strange questions about the meaning of life. Half of his remaining fleet was still arguing among themselves about whether they should continue fighting or start a book club. The other half had begun composing poetry about the beauty of space combat. For the first time in over 3 centuries, the Nexus Armada was forced to retreat. The Admiral's final transmission to his homeworld was a rambling report about how a single ship full of primitive warriors had somehow turned his greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. His superiors would never believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. The Nexus Empire had been defeated by 4 humans, and their refusal to accept defeat. Queen Mira stood in the ruins of her throne room, tears streaming down her luminous face. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy and overwhelming gratitude. Her people were alive, her world was free, and it was all thanks to 4 strangers who had traveled across the galaxy to help someone they had never met. She immediately sent messages to every world in the Galactic Alliance, sharing the story of humanity's incredible victory. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had lived in fear of the Nexus for generations suddenly realized that the Empire was not invincible. Rebellions began breaking out on conquered worlds as enslaved populations rose up against their oppressors. Within days, representatives from dozens of alien civilizations arrived at Queen Mira's palace. They came not as conquerors or diplomats, but as pilgrims seeking to understand how such a small force had achieved such an impossible victory. They studied the Korean team's tactics, interviewed the survivors, and tried to comprehend the human concept of fighting for others without expecting anything in return. The Galactic Alliance formally invited Earth to join their confederation, offering humanity access to advanced technology, trade agreements, and military partnerships. But more importantly, they offered something that humans had never had before: proof that they were not alone in the universe, and that there were others who shared their values of freedom and justice. Lieutenant Park found herself teaching Alien military academies about precision shooting, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. Her techniques were revolutionary to species that had relied on overwhelming firepower rather than surgical accuracy. She became famous throughout the galaxy as the sniper who could hit impossible targets while spinning through space. Sergeant Lee was invited to demonstrate his explosive techniques to engineering corps from 100 different worlds. His philosophy, of treating bombs as art rather than simple weapons, opened up entirely new approaches to both construction and destruction. Several alien species began incorporating human creativity into their own military doctrines. Corporal Choi became a legend among the galaxy's computer specialists. Her ability to turn an enemy's greatest strength into their greatest weakness was studied and admired, but never successfully copied. Other species could learn her techniques, but they could not replicate the uniquely human ability to think outside all established patterns. Captain Kim returned to Earth as the most decorated soldier in human history, but he refused all offers of promotion or political positions. He preferred to remain a simple captain, ready to answer the next call for help from anywhere in the galaxy. His example inspired a new generation of human warriors who understood that true strength came not from superior weapons, but from the willingness to stand up for what was right. The Sol Phoenix was retired to a place of honor in Sol's military museum, but its legacy lived on in the dozens of new ships that Earth began building with alien technology. Each vessel carried a small plaque with a simple message: "We came when you called." Queen Mira kept her promise to share advanced technology with humanity, but she also shared something even more valuable: the knowledge that humans were already perfect, exactly as they were. Their greatest weapons were not their guns or their ships, but their unbreakable spirit and their refusal to abandon anyone who needed help. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of the Nexus Empire was ending, and the age of human heroes had begun.